Okay. Neat. Oh, hello. Thank you.
Hello.
You. Hi, Dave. You okay? Thank you for joining, Mom.
Hi, darling.
Shira, this is a compliment. That's my mother and stepfather, David. So my mother comes in all the way from the Holy Land,
Oh,
that's so nice. Welcome
Hi,
to London.
nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
I need my phone.
Okay.
Because we'll speak to you soon. Okay, firstly, thank you very much, Shira. We're very excited to have you back with us. And lovely to see everybody. And I just have to, because I haven't got quickly prepare phone, we're going to be learning all for the year of we have an Aliyah and a Shamas, and I just have to say his name. So just hang on 1 second, sorry. Sorry about this. Just have to remind myself to say all the right things. Okay, so firstly, tonight we have an added person that we are going to be learning from, Le'ilu Nishmas Eliezer ben Yitzchak, and Naftali ben Tzvi Yehuda. Should have an Aliyah and a Shamas, and we actually do have, which is really quite incredible, because the whole program for Wiser Women for this time period of the year is really Le'ilu Nishmas, of Beryl Bas Moshe Halevi, and tonight is actually her husband's yahrzeit as well. So we should really only share simchas, and it's a pleasure for us to be here. And the other thing that I have to add tonight as well is that in different places in the world, there is actually a Shabbos project going on, which is really quite amazing. And I, this afternoon or this evening in South Africa, they had close to 1,000 women all together making their challah. And Rebbetzin Slavi Young Rice Wolf joined them in South Africa. And one of my friends messaged me and sent me a video of what was going on, and said she wished that I was there with her in South Africa. I said, me too. I said, but please go and give Slavi a hug from me, and tell her that we're very happy that at least she could be in South Africa, because we had hoped that she was going to come here last week. And in 1,000 people, literally 1.5 minutes later, she sends me a picture of her and Slavi with love. So there you go. HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs our world, and it obviously means that you are here also with us tonight, Shira, as a special injection of Shabbos project as well. So thank you for being with us, and thank you everybody for being with us. And now we'll hand over to you.
You know what? I always feel like a bit of a con artist being here, because I don't even bake my own challah. Is that a really
You don't
bad
have to be
thing
here for baking
admit?
challah. No, it's not for baking challah. It's for learning Torah. It's for learning Torah, certainly not for baking challah. And just the fact that we are mafresh challah at the end, it's just something, it's a minhag that we started with. So
I'm happy someone's doing it.
Yeah,
It's
so
just
I'm
not
happy.
me.
If you want to pick up some challah, homemade challah, you just let me know. We put it aside for you.
If I had to bake the challah as well, I wouldn't have had time to prepare the shir. So,
We're very excited. We're very excited. So thank you.
Did I see a little Leah Bella in the background?
You saw Leah Bella, and she said, oh, that's my mummy, my friend's mummy there. So there we go. She's very excited. Yes, we have Leah and Emmy staying here for a week.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah, lucky me.
Very exciting. Can I share screen?
Yes. Oh, hang on. Needs, can we share screen?
You need to make me the host, I think. Or co-host. I don't mind co-hosting with you.
I don't know how to do these things, but Needs will tell us. Needs, are you there to help us?
Okay. Well, in the meantime, let me ask you a question. Now, well, you've got your kids with you, Jan, so you need to be careful what you say. Now, we definitely all have moments with our kids, right? but we do love them. If somebody were to say to you, give up your child as a sacrifice, what would you say? Even if you're having a bad day with them, you'd say no, right? Even if it was a really bad day, you would say no. What if it was God and he said, please? I think personally, I'd really struggle with that. Okay, so we're going to be looking closer into this story because it's a very difficult story to understand. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to fully explain it because I'm not sure that any of us can fully get to the bottom of it. But let's see what we can come up with. Okay, so what I wanted to start with is probably quite a well-known quote that you may have heard before. It was said or written originally by Mark Twain in 1899, and he poses the following question, which is actually a brilliant question, and we're going to try to answer it tonight. So yes, we might be 100 odd years too late, but worth trying to answer a good question, right? Okay, so this is what he says. He says, if the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous dim puff of stardust lost to the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of, has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his commercial importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, abstruse learning are also way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He's made a marvelous fight in this world in all the ages and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out. And they sit in twilight now or have vanished. The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? Now, I had to read it directly from him because I couldn't have put it better myself. It really is. It's a complete miracle. It's statistically impossible that we should still be around nowadays. We're such a tiny 0.000 something% of the world population. And like he says, despite that, we're very, very prominent. Everyone's heard of the Jews. We're the top of every field. We've got a massively disproportionate number of Nobel Prize winners. We're the top in science and finance and medicine, everything. And it's bizarre when you think everything we've been through, every time we've had to uproot ourselves, every time someone's come along to try to kill us, it's happened so many times, and yet the Jews are still here and Judaism is still here. And that is a big mystery. So that is his question. What is the secret of the Jews' immortality? Okay, so in order to answer that, we're going to try to look at Avram's 10 tests and see if we can use these 10 tests to work out why it is that we're still here. Okay, so this is a list of Avram's 10 tests. So some of them we've already had in the previous few Sedras, and the ones in yellow are the ones that happen in this week's Sedra in Vayera. So the first one, maybe one of his most famous ones, is actually not in the Torah, it's in a Medrash, but it takes place in a place called Ur Kasdim, where he is cast into a fiery furnace by King Nimrod. Okay, we're going to look at that in more detail in a minute. The second one happened in last week's Sedra, Lech Lecha, go out from your land. And then the third one, there was a famine when he got to the land, where he got to Israel. The fourth one, he had to go down to Egypt because there was a famine in Israel. And when he gets there, Sarah gets kidnapped and taken to the house of Paro. Next, he gets involved in a massive war between 4 kings and 5 kings, a battle that wasn't really anything to do with him, but he had to get involved in. The sixth one was the Bris Bein Habasarim, where he had this covenant where Hashem tells him, which is probably quite a depressing thing to hear, that you're going to have loads of descendants, but they're all going to be really downtrodden and have a really hard time, going to be subjugated by every other nation, and that's their future. Number 7 is he was told to do Bris Milah, age 99, which I don't think we envy him for that. And then these 3 come in this week's Sedra, and we're going to look at those as well. So number 8 is quite similar to number 4. Sarah gets kidnapped again by a different king, by King Avimelech. The 9th one is that he has to get rid of his concubine, Hagar, sent her away from his house, and his son Ishmael as well. And the final one, the climax, is the Akedah Yitzchak, the binding of Yitzchak. Okay, so we're going to have a look at all of these in a bit more detail. But before we start, one thing that I want you to have in mind as we're going through them is this idea that the Medrash Tanchuma tells us. As soon as these tests start, the Medrash Tanchuma says the following thing. It says, our sages tell us that whatever happened to the patriarchs, so that's Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and is reported in the Torah, serves as a preview of what would happen to their descendants in the future. So everything that's going to happen to Avraham that we're going to discuss now are things that you'll recognize. We're going to see that they happen again and again throughout our history. These tests aren't designed to be one-off events. They're challenges that we as Avram's descendants are going to have to keep on facing. So to understand really what we are as a people is really worth looking in greater detail at these tests that Avram goes through. Okay, so this is his first test, and he's young at this point. It's before he's really made his name as Avram Avinu. Hashem has never spoken to him before. This predates Lech Lecha. It happens when he's young, and Hashem's never appeared to him before, but he intrinsically knows that God exists. And as a young guy, his father was Terach, who was Mr. Idols R Us. He was the biggest manufacturer of idols, and he owned a shop. And Avram, little Avram, was left in charge of the shop. And this is what happened. One day, his father left him there alone, and a woman came in with a plate full of flour and asked him, take this and offer it up to the idols. And what he did was, rather than doing that, he takes a stick and he breaks all of them and puts the stick in the hand of the largest one. When his father came back, he says to him, what have you done to them? And Avram says, really sorry. What happened was there was a big fight, and this woman came in with a plate full of flour and asked me to offer it to them. And one of them said, I've got to eat first. And the other one said, I've got to eat first. And then the largest one took the stick and broke the rest of them. And his father is like having none of it. He's like, why do you make sport of me? Have they any knowledge? These idols, do they know anything? How could they possibly have a fight like you've just described? And that's when Avram says to him, do your ears hear what your mouth has just said? How can you be serving these when you've just said they've got no knowledge, they didn't do anything? Now Terach was absolutely furious, and he wasn't, well, I don't think this was his finest parenting moment, but what he did was he takes Avram to King Nimrod, who was really scary, horrible superpower at the time. He was the king that everyone was incredibly scared of, and he schleps his little son Avram along to him. And at the time everyone worshipped idols. That was the in thing. And he tells Nimrod, he dobs him in. He says, this is my son Avraham, and look what he's just done to my idol shop. And he's really upset. And Nimrod challenges him. He says to him, let's worship fire. And Avram says back to him, rather, let's worship water, which quenches the fire. And okay, so Nimrod says to him, fine, let's worship water. And Avram says, no, let's worship the clouds because they carry the water. They're obviously stronger. So Nimrod says, fine, so let's worship the clouds. And Avram, he's always got to come back. He says, okay, so let's worship the wind because that blows the clouds. And Nimrod's like, fine, so we'll worship the wind. And Avram says, well, how about people? We can stand up against the wind. Let's worship people. Well, at this point, Nimrod's getting really annoyed with him. He's like, you know what, let's just go back to the beginning. We're going to worship fire, not only worship it, I'm going to chuck you in it, and let's see what this God of yours does. And Avram has spent really his life telling people that God exists. He doesn't want us to worship idols, and you've got to listen to God. So at that moment, when faced with fire or admitting that God doesn't exist, he's like, no, I believe in God. And he steps into the fire, and he doesn't just step in it for a minute. You've heard this story before. This is a famous story. But actually, this event builds up and builds up, and more people start to hear about it. Yes, they didn't have WhatsApp yet. But you can imagine there was like a word of mouth thing spreading. Have you seen this? This guy in the fire, and he's walking around, and he's not getting burnt. And it caused a huge Kiddush Hashem. Because at that moment, everyone believed, of course, there's a God. Of course, the guy that Avram's talking about must be real. Because otherwise, how could he possibly be walking around in this fire? So that was Avram's first challenge, and he passes it with flying colours. He does really well for himself. At which point Hashem decides he's ready, and Hashem actually appears to him, and just out of the blue he starts talking to him in Parashas Lech Lecha without announcing himself in any way. He doesn't say who he is. There's just a big booming voice that says, go for yourself from your land, from your birthplace, from the house of your father to the land that I will show you. Now, if I had a big booming voice telling me to do that, I think I would probably have some questions. Avram has no questions. He doesn't say, who is it? He doesn't say, what are you talking about? He doesn't say, where am I going? He literally, it's almost as if he's been waiting for this moment, waiting for this voice to come and talk to him. And he picks up his bags and packs up and he goes straight away, not knowing where he's going. And then he gets faced with his next challenge, because when he is shown where he's going, which we know is Israel, Eretz Canaan at the time, which we call Eretz Israel, there's a famine. And whenever there's a famine in Eretz Israel, people go down to Egypt, because Egypt has a big source of water, it has the Nile, so that's where you go. They've always got food there. So he goes down to Egypt, and these are the Pesukim, okay? He says there was a famine in the land, and Avram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was very severe in the land. Now, as I'm reading, pay attention to the words in blue, because they're going to start ringing some bells. They sound quite familiar, okay? So there's a famine in the land, and Avram goes down to Egypt. Those are the first bits in blue that we've got so far. As he was about to enter Egypt, he says to his wife, Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. If the Egyptians see you and think she's my wife, they will kill me. Yeah, so they'll kill Abraham and they'll let Sarah live. Okay, so hold on to those as well. Please say that you're my sister, that I may go well with me because of you, and I may remain alive thanks to you. When Avram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw how very beautiful the woman was. Pharaoh's courtiers saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's palace. And because of her, it went well with Abraham. He acquired sheep and oxen and asses, and male and female slaves, and she-asses and camels. And now again in blue, but the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his household with mighty plagues on account of Sarai, the wife of Abraham. Pharaoh sent for Abraham and said, what is this you have done to me? Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister, so that I took her as my wife? Now, here is your wife. Take her and go. Okay, and Pharaoh put men in charge of him, and they sent him off with his wife and all that he possessed. Now, all those bits in blue should be ringing bells, because it sounds very familiar, right? It's very similar to a story that we see much later on in the Chumash, when the Jewish people end up in Egypt, right? So it all starts with a famine. Yaakov has to go down to Egypt because there's a famine, and that's how it all starts. And then once he's there, it starts getting worse and worse for the Jews, and we become enslaved. And who does Avram say they'll kill? He says they'll kill him, Avram the male, right? And we know all the baby boys were killed, and he says, and they'll let you, Sarah, the female, live. And that's what happened to all the baby girls. They all got to live. And then we see that Pharaoh in this story, there's a different Pharaoh, by the way, he gets afflicted with plagues as a result. And we know that later on in the story of Mitzrayim, that King Pharaoh, again, he gets afflicted with plagues. And eventually, at the end of Yetzias Mitzrayim, we're told, go, right? He's had enough of us, and he sends us out. And we're sent out with a great deal of wealth and possessions, just like Abraham is when he leaves now. So you can see there's very strong parallels of what's going to happen to Abraham's children as a result of what he's going through. Now, even within Avram's own lifetime, we start to see these tests repeat themselves, okay? So like I said earlier, test number 8 is actually very similar to test number 4. So Avram moves on from Egypt, and he carries on traveling, and he's in the Negev, and he's sojourning in Gerar, and the king there is King Avimelech. And the same thing happens. Avram says to Sarah, pretend that you're my sister, don't say that you're my wife. And the same thing happens. King Avimelech sees Sarah, she's very beautiful, and again, she gets kidnapped and taken to a palace of a king. Okay, and we see that this is a really similar story that happens again, and the same thing happens. He finds out it's actually not his sister, it's actually his wife, and he gets annoyed, and he chucks them out. Okay, so we see even within Avram's own lifetime, events start to repeat themselves. Now, what about his son Yitzchak? Same thing happens to Yitzchak. Yitzchak's married to Rivka. And again, there's a famine in the land. Okay, so very similar to Abraham. Just it says in the Pesukim, just like the famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. And Yitzchak went to Avimelech, the same king Avimelech, and he says the same thing to Rivka. It's almost laughable. He says, you know, when my mom and dad came here, Avram and Sarah, Avram had to pretend that Sarah was his sister, because otherwise it would kidnap her. And they did kidnap her anyway, but it's better that you pretend that you're my sister than my wife. He goes through exactly the same charade that his father went through. And the Mefarshim here say that what happens to Yitzchak is not only a repetition of what happened to Avraham, but it also foretells the Babylonian exile, which again, there's lots of similarities. It also started with a famine. They also left with a lot of riches, and they were in prominent positions, and nobody actually enslaved them or messed with them. And they were also told when they were leaving that no one was allowed to touch them and that they should be left to leave in peace. So it's very similar, parallel to, again, what's going to happen in the future generation. Okay, so talking about the Babylonian exile, we've got, this is the next story in Tanakh, which again has some very similar terminology and some very similar occurrences. So this is the story of Daniel, which is maybe less well known. The book of Daniel is in the book of Kesuvim, and it tells the story of a guy called Daniel, hence the name of the book. And during the time when Nebuchadnezzar was destroying, he was the king of Bavel, and he was destroying the Beis HaMikdash, he sends his men to acquire for him some of the young Jewish men. And he wants them to basically come live in his palace. And he has this whole re-education program or indoctrination program where he wants them to start living a Babylonian way of life. And so Daniel gets taken along with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and they're kidnapped and held against their will in a palace. So again, very similar to Sarah, happened to her twice, happened to Yosef as well, actually, happens to Rivka, and now it's happening to Daniel. So what happens, he's a young guy, he's only a teenager, and they're looking after them, they're offering them food and drink. And Daniel, it says in the Pesukim, Daniel resolves not to defile himself with the king's food or the wine he drank. So he sought permission of the chief officer not to defile himself. So it means he doesn't want to eat the non-kosher food. He's a frum guy, doesn't want to eat non-kosher. And God disposed the chief officer to be kind and compassionate towards Daniel. The chief officer said to Daniel, I fear that my lord the king, who allotted food and drink to you, will notice that you look out of sorts, unlike the other youths of your age, and you will put my life in jeopardy with the king. So although he's asked him to be nice to him and the guy likes him, he's like, I don't want to put my life on the line. If I don't feed you properly, everyone's going to notice, and then I'm going to get in trouble for not looking after you. So you've got to eat the food. And Daniel says to the guard, look what he says, the bits in yellow font. Daniel replied to the guard, whom the chief officer had put in charge of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servant for 10 days. So it uses the same word of nes, nisayon, and it also references 10, giving us legumes, vegetables to eat and water to drink, then compare our appearance with that of the youth to eat of the king's food, and do with your servants as you see fit. So he agreed to this plan of theirs, tested them for 10 days, and when the 10 days were over, they looked better and healthier than all the youths who were eating of the king's food. So obviously it was very miraculous, and Hashem saw the great lengths they'd gone to not to eat non-kosher. Now the question is, they weren't in any way halachically obliged to do that. It's a case of pikuach nefesh. You can't starve yourself. If the only food available is non-kosher, then he's got no reason to not eat it. He really went above and beyond the call of duty. What gave him that strength to decide that he's not going to eat the food? That's not something that he had to do. So the Midrash Tanchuma relates that the officer asked him exactly this. He says, are you descended from nobility that you are able to withstand the test of 10 days without food or wine? Listen to Daniel's reply. He says, yes, indeed, for we are the descendants of that righteous man who was tried 10 times. Perhaps his merit will assist us. So he's in a very similar situation to, he's grown up with the same Torah that we have. He knows the stories of Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov and Sarah and Rivka and Rachel and Leah. And the fact that they've been through it before gives him that strength of character to say, no, I'm not going to be the one to eat treif just because I've been kidnapped. People have been kidnapped before and they still stood their ground. Yosef was really, really frum in Paro's house, and he's always talking about Hashem. I can do the same. And that's what gave Daniel the strength to survive what he went through. Now we move on to a more familiar story. Again, another case of history repeating itself in Tanakh. Who is our next famous person who gets kidnapped and taken to a palace? Of course, it's none other than the beautiful Queen Esther. And again, it's almost illogical. There's so many beautiful women, and this random, nothing particularly special about Esther. Why was she picked of all the people? She had to be like right in that place at that time. It's almost as if it's a setup. The king loved Esther more than all the other women. She won his grace and favor more than all the other maidens. So he set a royal diadem on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So lo and behold, Queen Esther also gets kidnapped, held against her will, and locked up in the palace of a random non-Jewish king. It really does happen again and again throughout our history. And the Bereshit Rabbah, which is a medrash, says that Hashem promised Avraham when he fulfilled his mission of Lech Lecha, of leaving his land, he says to him, you're going to merit a descendant, Hadassah, which is another name for Esther, who will save the Jews. She's going to be the Goel, the redeemer of all the Jews, and she was the same age as Avraham was when he was told Lech Lecha. So the Midrash connects Esther's strength of character to the fact that Avram had passed his test. Okay, now on to our next festival. We've done Purim, and we've got, again, a similar, not similar, but it also parallels one of Avram's 10 tests in the Hanukkah story. So this, again, is a story you may have heard before, but you may not have seen it inside. This is a story of a woman called Hannah who had 7 sons, and this story, it's an awful story. It really, really gets to me. This is what was happening at the time. All the Jews were being told that they had to bow down to idols, that they had to stop believing in Hashem, stop keeping Torah and mitzvahs, and they were said either bow down or you're going to be killed. And this woman Hannah had 7 sons, and they were all offered this opportunity to bow down to the idols. And this is what the Gemara is talking about. This verse applies to the woman and her 7 sons who died as martyrs for the sake of the sanctification of God's name. The incident occurred as follows. They brought in the first of the woman's sons before the emperor and said to him, worship the idol. He said to them, I can't do so. As it's written in the Torah, I am the Lord your God. They immediately took him out and killed him. They brought in yet another son and said to him, worship the idol. Go through all the sons, all 6 of them have now been through this. And they get to the last one, the 7th one. The first 6 have all been killed at this point. And he says to them, I can't do it. As it's written in the Torah, you've avouched the Lord this day to be your God, and the Lord has avouched you. We've taken an oath to the Holy One, blessed be he. We will not exchange him for a different God. And he's taken an oath to us. It was the youngest brother who had said this, and the emperor pitied him. Seeking a way to spare the boy's life, the emperor said to him, I will throw down my seal, my ring, before you. Bend over and pick it up so that people will see he's accepted the king's authority. He's trying to give him a get out. I'm just going to drop my ring. No one will even think you're bowing down to an idol. I'll know you're bowing down to an idol and you'll know it. People will just think you're picking up a ring. And this little one, the youngest one, the boy says to him, woe to you if you think that for the sake of your honor, I'm going to fulfill your command and do this. Then for the sake of the honor of the Holy One, blessed be he, all the more so I shall fulfill his command. As they were taking him out to be killed, his mother said to them, give him to me so that I may give him a small kiss. And she said to him, my son, go and say to your father Avraham, you bound 1 son to the altar, to the Akedah, but I bound 7 Akedahs, 7 altars. She too, in the end, went up to the roof and fell and died. And a divine voice, a bas kol, came out and said, a joyful mother of children, Em Habanim Samecha, as she raised her children to be devoted in the service of God. Now you got to start thinking to yourself, what is it that throughout our history we've got such strong, even in these little kids, such strong emunah that when faced with that choice of giving up your Judaism or being killed, again and again we've chosen Judaism. It's really quite miraculous. Now, so my question is, do we still see this happening in modern times, this idea of these tests being repeated again and again? So let's take a look. This is a map that I got from Rabbi Google, and it's a map of all of the places that the Jews have lived and the Jews have been exiled from. After we finish this year, go and Google the list of names of places that we've lived. There isn't a place that we've lived in that we haven't been expelled from. There is no other nation in history who has had to pick up and leave and start again in a different place. And every time we do it, we get to a new place and we just replicate what we already had. We will build a mikveh, we will build a school, we will build a shul, and we'll just set up community again. And it's incredible. If you think how many times we've done that over the course of history, throughout the centuries, everywhere we've ever lived, we've had to leave and start again. And if you go around the Jewish communities of the world nowadays, it's incredible. You can go to Shabbos anywhere in the world, and they'll be keeping this, Roberts and Dove was saying that it's it's the Shabbos project this week in some places. Everywhere we're doing the same Shabbos, we're keeping the same halachas. Their Shabbos meals will be similar, they'll be singing the same Zemiris, there'll be the same davening, they're keeping the same halachas. How is it possible that we've held on to this through thousands of years of having to start again and again in different places? It really doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'm very much with Mark Twain on this. Okay, so that is just a visual of all of the Jewish expulsions. Okay, and now to our more recent history. Whenever I hear Kiv Shana Eish, my immediate go-to thought is always Auschwitz, because it's so, you know, the story is so similar, literally being chucked into a fiery furnace. Everyone willingly went in, and yes, we were not willingly going in, but we're kind of facing the same things. So this is a testimony from Viktor Frankl. He says, shortly after arriving at Auschwitz, Frankl was stripped of his most precious possession, a manuscript that was his life's work, which he had hidden in his coat pocket. Realizing that the odds of his survival were small, no more than 1 in 28, he had what he described as perhaps his deepest experience in the concentration camps. I had to undergo and overcome the loss of my mental child, and now it seemed as if nothing and no one would survive me, neither a physical nor a mental child of my own. So I found myself confronted with a question whether under such circumstances my life was ultimately void of meaning. An answer to this question, with which I was wrestling so passionately, was already in store for me. This was the case when I had to surrender my clothes and in turn inherited the worn-out rags of an inmate who had already been sent to the gas chamber. Instead of the many pages of my manuscript, I found in a pocket of the newly acquired coat one single page torn out of a Hebrew prayer book, out of a Siddur, containing the most important Jewish prayer, Shema Yisrael. How should I have interpreted such a coincidence, other than as a challenge to live my thoughts, instead of merely putting them on paper? And then in the concluding sentence, Frankl again draws on this timeless proclamation of faith. Our generation is realistic, for we have come to know man as he really is. After all, man is that being who invented the gas chambers of Auschwitz. However, he is also that being who entered those gas chambers upright with the Lord's Prayer, with the Shema Yisrael on his lips. And I picked one story, but there are countless stories of Jews going to the gas chamber with Shema Yisrael on their lips or singing Ashreinu Ma Tov Chalkeinu. How is it possible that we, faced with something like that, something so horrific, unimaginable, and yet still hold on to our faith, to belief in God, that Ashreinu, how happy we are that we've got this chelek, that we've got the Torah, that we've got mitzvahs, that we've got Judaism. It's really quite remarkable. But I think in order to really understand the nature of our history and the nature of all these tests that keep repeating themselves, this pattern that we see, these 10 tests of Avram that have carried on throughout our generations to this day, I think we need to look a closer look at the final one, at the Akedah, which is in this week's Sedra in Vayera, and in order to really understand what the nature of a test is. Okay, so these are the Pesukim. Sometimes afterwards, God put Avraham to the test. He said to him, Avraham, and he answered, here I am. And he said, take your son, your favorite one, Isaac, Yitzchak, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. So early next morning, Avraham saddled his ass and took with him 2 of his servants and his son Yitzchak. He split the wood for the burnt offering and he set out for the place for which God had told him. Now, a few things that I want you to consider before we go into this in more detail. So firstly, let's consider what's happened up until now. So whilst Avram's been undergoing these 9 tests up until now, he's had this promise looming over him that he is going to be the father of a great nation. And yet he gets to age 99 and Sarah's 89 and they don't have any children. And I think Sarah by that point has kind of come to terms with it. She's 89. She's kind of probably not really thinking about having children anymore. You know, it's very nice that Hashem said that we're going to have children, but here I am. I will get on with baking my challah in my tent. That's what she was doing at the beginning of this week's Sedra when the 3 Malachim turned up. And that's how this parasha begins. It starts with these 3 random men who she's never met before, suddenly announcing to her at age 89, in a year's time, at age 90, you're going to give birth to a son. But how do you think Sarah was feeling in that moment? It's something that she'd always wanted, that she'd been desperate for at one point in her life, but now she's an old lady. And I can imagine she's feeling, a mixture of emotions, a bit incredulous, maybe doesn't quite believe it. We know that she laughs to herself when she hears the news, maybe a happy laugh, maybe a nervous laugh, but not quite sure. Probably a lot of emotions running through her mind. But further into the Sedra, this prophecy comes true. A year later, lo and behold, they are blessed with this son. They brought him up, and she even managed to nurse him. There was like an extra miracle that not only did she manage to give birth, but she managed to nurse him. And at age 2 or 3, when he was weaned, they threw him a big party and they celebrated him. These are people who are very excited to have children, or to have a child, and the promise of future children and future generations. If you compare them to the rest of the world at the time, it was quite a prevalent custom for people to just be giving away their children and to be sacrificing them. Child sacrifice was very prevalent. And Avram is the one guy who's going around telling everyone, this is not what you do to children. Hashem is a kind and a merciful God, and he would never want you to do that to your children. He wants you to love them and look after them. And look, I've got this beautiful son and I'm looking after him and I love him. And then test number 9 comes along, and he already has to kind of, I don't know, he already has to kind of rethink his position on parenting, because Hashem tells him to chuck out his other son, to send Yishmael away. And I know we think of Yishmael as a bit of a baddie and a bad influence on Yitzchak, and we can understand maybe the rationale why Sarah wanted him to be sent away. But at the same time, he's Avram's son, and he even says in the Pesukim, but he's my son. Like, he's quite upset about sending him away. And Hashem reassures him, you know what, it's the right thing to do. And all of that is building up to this final test where Hashem says, you know that son that I promised you that you're going to have, that he's going to be the father of all your future generations, the son that you really love, your favorite one, I want you to go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering. Now, the other thing is to bear in mind, Avram, where is he at this time? He's still at home. He's like having this private conversation with Hashem out of earshot of Sarah. She doesn't know anything about the Akedah. He probably tells Sarah, we're going on like, a lad's trip, me and Yitzchak, see you soon. She's none the wiser. And he goes off to do this Akedah on his own. Now, how does Avram feel in that moment? We know that he's a good person, he's a moral person, he's even an emotional person. Earlier on in the Sedra, when Hashem tells him he's going to destroy Sodom, Avram challenges God. He's not one to be shy. He's got such a close relationship with Hashem that he actually feels he can challenge Hashem. And he says to Hashem at the time, you know what? I don't think that's the right thing to do. How can you, who's so just and so fair, how can you just kill people? And Hashem explains to him, that they're really evil, and Avram has this whole negotiation with him. But Avram's not scared to challenge Hashem when he thinks that there's something not right going on. But in this scenario, the most challenging challenge of all time, Hashem says to him, sacrifice that son, the one that you love, the one that I've promised you is going to be the future of everything. And Avram just goes. He doesn't question anything. He just goes. And we've got to ask ourselves the question, how could Hashem have ordered Avram to kill his son? It doesn't really make any sense. And the problem is aggravated by the fact there's 16 places in the Torah, I've listed them for you here, where child sacrifice is condemned as an abomination before Hashem. You are not allowed to sacrifice children. It's against halacha. It says it very clearly in the Torah so many times. And Avram, he's a learned man, he knows this. He knows Hashem doesn't want people to sacrifice children. And he knows Hashem has promised him this child is going to be the future of all his descendants. And at the same time, this same Hashem is telling him that he should kill him. On so many levels, Avram's conflicted. Emotionally, he doesn't want to do it. Spiritually, he doesn't even feel like it's the right thing to do, because he knows, he understands morality things. He understands that Hashem doesn't like child sacrifice. And he has spent his life telling people not to do this. How can he go ahead and do this? Lo and behold, though, he does do it. I think in order to understand the nature of Avram's final test, we have to look at this medrash. It's a medrash Tanchuma, And I've just been doing this online course on Midrashim, which is fascinating, with Simi Peters. And so just to explain the background of how Midrashim work, because I didn't know this is all new to me. So if you're looking at a Midrash, you have to analyze it in the same way as you'd analyze a posuk, in that every detail is relevant. So if there's an extra word or an extra detail or a missing word or a missing detail, there's something significant about that. So all these Midrashim where there's a mashal, a parable, it's not like there was a random story floating around at the time like Cinderella or something, and they've decided that they should use this as an example to draw out a nice life lesson. The same people that wrote the Gemara, highly intelligent, carefully crafted these stories so that it would get exactly the point across in order to explain the posuk that they're commenting on. Okay, so what we're going to do is have a look at this medrash in great detail and pick out all the points in. And whilst we're reading it, I want you to look at the bits in green, identify who are the different characters in the mashal, in the example, and connect them to the nimshal, to the explanation. There's one person who doesn't quite fit in, that he appears in the mashal but not in the nimshal. And the other thing is that in the mashal, in the story, the task set is not quite the same as the task in the nimshal, in the explanation. So let's take a look. Okay, so the Medrash is commenting on the words Kachna es bincha. And the reason that they're commenting is because it's actually a really funny way to ask it. Kachna means please take your son. Whereas in other tests, God commanded Avram, lech lecha, go for yourself. He doesn't ask him, he tells him. This time he says please. Okay, so why is this time different? Why is he asking him? If it's a question, if it's a request, then surely Avram could have said no. If it's a command, okay, maybe he has to do it. But this seems like more of a request. Okay, so let's see how they explain it. So they say, there's a mashal, there was once a king who was constantly engaged in wars, and he had in his army a powerful warrior who was victorious in every engagement. At one time, a crucial battle developed, and he said to his mighty warrior, stand beside me, please, nah, lest my generals say that the earlier battles were minor engagements. Similarly, so this is the Nimshal now, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Avraham, I have tried you 9 times and you underwent those trials successfully. Now endure this final trials that nobody can say the earlier trials were of little consequence. Okay, so does anyone want to unmute themselves and go through this with me? We're going to try and match up all the characters in the Mashal to all the characters in the Nimshal. Need one brave volunteer. Don't be shy. Okay, so it might have to be you, Roberts and Dove. Who is the king in this mashal? So the king in the story, who's constantly engaged in wars, who's the king in the nimshal? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Yeah.
Hashem.
Hashem, good. Hashem's the king. Right, I'm sticking with you, Juliet. So Hashem is the king. What are these other wars, other battles that have taken place already?
Tests of faith in him, whether he exists.
Okay, good. So the earlier battles are Avram's earlier tests, the first 9 tests. Who is the mighty warrior, the powerful warrior?
It's Avraham, if we're going with this,
Good.
but really it's Hashem who's done it, but Avraham.
No, but Avram's the one who's going to battle, right? He's the one who's being challenged. So good. So he's the mighty warrior. And there's a crucial battle coming up. What's the crucial battle?
The Akedah.
The Akedah. So this is like the big one. Okay. And then he says, stand beside me, lest my generals say that the earlier battles were minor engagements. Who are the generals?
People who don't believe in Hashem.
Okay, good. The problem is with that in the Nimshal, in the real scenario that we've got here, picture the scene. There's Hashem talking to Avraham, private conversation telling him to do this Akedah, to take his son. And he takes him to do the Akedah. He takes people with him. He doesn't tell them what he's doing. And when he gets to the mountain, he leaves them at the bottom. So at the top of this mountain, when he's carrying it out, there is only Avram and Yitzchak and Hashem. So who are these generals? Who is there? Who is physically present? Who could possibly criticize Avram? If Avram in that moment said, you know what, I've done 9 things, I'm not doing the 10th. I don't want to do it. I'm not happy about doing it. If Avram had done that, who would have known about it?
Yitzhak.
Yishmael doesn't know what he's doing up there. Yishmael is left at the bottom of the mountain. He doesn't know what's going on yet.
The
Yitzhak.
angels.
Angel, someone saying? Okay, well,
The
everyone else
angels.
in the story is actually a physical presence, and there's no physical witnesses. The only people, think about it now, how do we know that this story took place? Because it's written down in the Torah. So actually, the only witnesses to the story, the only people that know about this story are,
Us.
it's us. We are the generals. We are the generals in the same army that Avram's in. So he is the mighty warrior and we are the generals. Now, let's have a look at the parallels between, on the one hand, a warrior fighting for a king on his behalf versus Avraham overcoming his own struggles. That doesn't quite correlate, does it? Avram's tests are Avram's tests. It's something personal that he's going through, whereas a mighty warrior is fighting someone else's battles on his behalf. He's fighting for the king. So how do you think we're going to mesh that together? Remember, this medrash has been carefully crafted. They're not just random details. The people who wrote the medrash wants to make a point about what's actually going on here. See, we really think, when we talk about Avram's tests, we talk about them being, as we said, Avram's tests. When we talk about ourselves going through tests and challenges, we think of them as our challenges. The medrash is telling us the exact opposite is true. When you're going through something, when Avram was fulfilling these tests, if Avram had failed, if he hadn't fulfilled the mission, it would have been okay. So Avram didn't get to quite be, the Avram Avinu that we've come to know and love. But, he was a pretty good guy. But that wasn't the point of the test. The point of the test was that actually Avram was going to war. He was fighting Hashem's battles. He was fighting for Hashem's name in the world. And we see it all the way through all of his tests. Think of that first one, the Kivshan La'esh. As he's in the fire, more and more people are gathering together and starting to believe more and more people that God exists. That is Avram bringing Hashem into the world. That is a Kiddush Hashem. Yes, Avram's the one who's standing in the fire, but think what it's doing for the world. That is much greater than whatever Avram's going through on a personal level, right? So the fact that these 10 tests carry on throughout our history, they show us that everything that we're going through, it's not random, right? These 10 things in particular have been carefully crafted. I can't tell you why these 10 in particular, but you can see when you look at our history that the things that we've gone through over the years are not random. They're part of a bigger plan. And one thing worth noting, I'm going a bit rabbi tats here, but the whole idea that a word that shares a root shares a similar meaning in Hebrew. So the word nes has 3 meanings. It means a test, right? The 10 nisyonos of Avraham. It also means a miracle, because if you can get through a test like the Kivshan La'esh, if you can get through a test like the Akedah, that's miraculous. How can you do that to yourself and survive? That is a miracle. And the final thing is, it means it's a banner. It's a way of waving. It's a way of alerting people, of showing a Kiddush Hashem, of bringing the name of Hashem into the world and making Hashem, the fact that he exists, into something public that the whole world starts to believe. So perhaps really the challenge of the Akedah wasn't ever about sacrificing Yitzchak, because that was never really going to happen. Hashem never really wanted him to sacrifice Yitzchak. Rather, what happened was Avram having to sacrifice himself. He sacrifices his own principles, his own beliefs, his own intellect, knowing Hashem couldn't possibly want him to be doing this, and yet he's asking me to do this, and following Hashem's word, even with the uncertainty of it contradicting everything he's been told and believes to be true. So when things happen in the world that we don't understand, it's a struggle and it's a test of our faith. And we think to ourselves, where does our moral compass lie? As the world around us changes and morality shifts, are we able to follow the Torah? Because actually morality is what Hashem says it is. Even if we think something's immoral, because we think we know better, Hashem's telling Avram, no, this is what I want you to do at the moment. I know you think that child sacrifice is wrong, but in this moment I'm telling you to do it, and you need to ignore the fact that you think you understand how I work, because in this moment this is what I'm telling you to do. And that's what we have to do throughout our lives, to do what Hashem wants us to do, because Hashem wants us to do it, because he's got this big picture plan, which we're not privy to. So to answer our original question, what is the secret to our immortality? So maybe we're starting to answer it here. How have we survived against all odds, everything that history has thrown at us, and not only survived, but thrived? Because our history isn't random, although we don't understand why. We were meant to be challenged and tested through expulsion from every country we've ever lived. And we're always asked this question, choose God or death or Judaism or baptism or convert or go. And yet we're still here. We're living as Jews all over the world. And now we've got Eretz Israel back again, because our resounding answer throughout history has always been Hashem and Torah. Where does that strength come from? It's because we are the generals in Hashem's army. We too share this mission, this task that Avram started for us of promoting Hashem's name in the world. We are the witnesses, even after thousands of years that these events took place. And we saw Avram passing all of these tests, and he passed on that strength and that courage throughout the generations to his descendants, to us. And Mark Twain and the rest of the world who are commenting and are astounded by the Jewish people, they were meant to notice our struggles and observe how miraculous we were. That was the whole point of these tests. And that is the whole point of everything that we do as Jews, to bring a Kiddush Hashem to the world, and the light and the knowledge of Torah and Judaism and God. So I wish you all good Shabbos and enjoy your baking. And Rabbits and Dove, back to you.
Struggling with my computer today. Thank you very much. I think I'm going to have to do some chazara on that one. But I have to tell you, I've got my little one saying, but what about his name?
Right.
Not Isaac, Yitzchak. So let's go and here, you know, I've got this little one here. But amazing. And the truth is that I think that with every level of different things, the whole Nisayan of all the different tests that each and every one of us is going to have, are going to have the different levels of that test that comes through us. This was Avram's test, and each person, each one of us is actually going to have a different test that's actually going to be befitting for us, even if it's not on such a great sort of, you know, that sort of greatness, but for us individually and personally, it is probably something which is really that same sort of test in where we see that it is. And Mirz Hashem, we should all be able to pass those tests the same way, and certainly be able to be looking forward to greeting Mashiach very soon together and being in Yerushalayim, which is amazing. So Shira, thank you very much. And I love your clarity, just clear. We will just make a bracha and I will do. So let's see. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu la'afrish chala min ha'isa.
Amen.
Amen.
Zu chala. And the feast of the mitzvah of Afrashas Challah, that all of us women together will be dancing very soon by the Beis HaMikdash with our tambourines, with all our yummy challah that we won't be taking and putting away, but that we will be giving to the Kohanim. And that's why we're all just practicing to make sure that our Kohanim get good challah. And
Right now,
to keep our Shabbos, to lift up your Shabbos, and just to know that even if we are, you know, we all celebrate Shabbos every single week. And
Rabbits and
it
Dove.
must be extra special, and we should all just merit to do it together. So Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos. Thank
Can you do a
fantastic.
Shalema for Leah
And we're looking
Bassar?
forward, please God, to the next one. No,
Sorry,
I
can you
mean,
do a
say
piece of
something?
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, for Leah Bassar.
Leah Bas Sarabasia,
Refuah Shalema.
for we should be zeicha to a refuah shalema, be'ezrat Hashem b'sorot tovot.
Amen, thank you.
Okay. Okay, simchas ba'ol.
Thank you. Good Shabbos.
Okay, good Shabbos,
Good
everybody.
Shabbos.
Shabbos, thank you.
Night, Mom. Say good night, Granny. Say good night to Granny. She should be sleeping. It's fine. Come on.
What time are you